Alright, so to begin, what we will do is ask you folks, if you've completed that, what is culture, if you will hand that forward. Now here's the thing, it can have your name on it, or preferably it would not have your name on it, because that part doesn't necessarily matter. Maybe write your name on the back of it. And that way, if you ended up wanting it back, we could find yours again. So why don't you do that on the back of it? That way, while I'm glancing at the front of it, I don't see it. You've already put your name on the front? Not a big deal. Go ahead and pass that forward, please. Oh, you guys are like, whoa, I don't know if I want to do this now. Let's see. So remember what we're trying to do. We're trying to get you to tell us what you think culture is. Now, in semesters past, I've done this, I think, a little bit more honestly. And what I mean by that is a little bit more purely. I've done it in class on the first day, which means that folks have not had access. Well, they might have actually purchased the book and maybe read through chapter 1, so that's already tainted their ideas. But ideally what we would do is we would get just your pure kind of off-the-cuff remarks about what you think culture is all about. Is anybody else who wants to share their ideas? Okay, now we're not going to read through all of these, but I do want to be able to kind of have some examples to throw out there. Again, I don't think this is a pure test of your prior knowledge or ideas or biases about what culture is, but I think it comes closest to what we can accomplish. So, how about some definitions of culture? How about some definitions? We have the difference between different groups of people as far as their language, beliefs, customs, and norms. Whoever wrote this took Anthropology 1102, right? That is the textbook definition of culture, I believe. Like if you go to Merriam-Webster or something like that. We're not going to say anything mean about that definition. That works and is technically correct. I think, by the way, all these answers are likely to be correct. Let's see here. Define culture. Any group of individuals who share common roles, ethics, I believe this says, traditions, rituals, or purpose. Now that's interesting. That's also sort of especially with the inclusion of the idea of roles, a sociological kind of slant to it. Definitely still has the idea of traditions and rituals. Sounds like anthropology. Again, here we're looking for what's going to be the difference with psychology. Why do we need this course in this subfield in psychology, this new perspective, if it's already adequately covered in some other disciplines, namely anthropology and sociology? Let's see what else we have here. I'm just kind of randomly pulling these. There's a long one. Culture is the way of life for a group of people. Wow, I mean that's very broad, very general. I think that works. And it says more. Including, I'm adding including, beliefs, traditions, appearance, interesting. Social norms are included in the culture of people. From studying and experiencing different cultures and their histories, we can have a better understanding of people from different cultures and places. Okay, all right, that's a good starting point. I like the idea of appearance, and I would imagine not just your physical appearance as far as genetic or biology, but also including your manner of dress and things like that, the display rules that your culture allows for. Okay. Define culture. Similarities within a population that may also distinguish or differentiate it from other populations. Okay, so it's something that can help us to tell apart. That's interesting. Especially when you consider that if we're all multicultural people, and we might have a culture proper that we hail from, but there also might be cultural similarities that we share with people from other places. And in some respect, there will be some overlap. And I guess the larger picture of culture, culture proper then, would be the thing that distinguishes us. So something about the idea of culture, as implied by this definition, helps us to tell each other apart. Interesting, right? To differentiate people. Okay, I like it. Any other ideas that we might not have thrown out there? I can tell you none of these ideas are what we're building toward today. And all those ideas are correct, but we're going to get a little bit more specific than that in our working definition. And so, thankfully, you folks didn't trump that and didn't just go to chapter 1 and look it up, right? And part of that is there's no place in chapter 1 where, well, there is one place, but you really gotta find it. There's no bold-faced term in chapter 1 of your textbook that tells you this is what it is. In fact, your textbook goes to great great pains to tell you how difficult it is to define the term. We also have what was assigned last time was to read through, and you'll have more opportunity to read this over the weekend, is to read through Adam Cohen's 2009 piece in American Psychologist, which is the #1 journal in the field just as far as numbers go. It goes out to over 100,000 practicing psychologists, research and clinical, in the country every month. And so to have a first author lead article in that journal is to have more than arrived. And so here he is asking, what is culture? What counts as culture, basically, which is also related to the title of chapter 1 in our book. So a good place to start. And he goes on for 12, 13, 14 pages, double column, single space pages, trying to figure out, in the year 2009, does psychology have a firm grasp on what it is that we mean when we say culture? And so we'll use this also as a touchstone in just a little bit today, and perhaps a little bit of next time. All right, so we'll leave we won't tell you what the definition is yet, and some of you have already read ahead and you know what the working definition is going to end up being, and that's okay. Just hold your tongue for a little bit. How about this? What are some examples of culture? This could be fun, and we have that's built into the PowerPoint now as well. Let's see. I like this. I have to see who wrote this. This is Kelly Kramer wrote this. I'm sorry to embarrass you. She's like, why? Why did you have to do this? Birthdays. First example of culture, of where you can find cultures, and birthdays. I like it. What a neat idea. Birthdays, festivals. And basically, I think then you kind of extracted the general rule, and you basically said celebratory days or events. Most definitely, yeah. Clothing, types of food, and the way individuals, and the way in which they are prepared, the different foods. So it could even be the same food, just prepared in a different way. Maybe it has to be, in order to be authentic to that culture, prepared in a very specific way with certain utensils and things like that. These things become very important. These little seemingly trivial differences become what matter most, right? So human beings are somehow set up for being attuned to these differences. Let's see here. I can't read the rest of your writing. Consumed, prepared, consumed, and sometimes when they are eaten. Sometimes even the way that they're eaten, the manner in which they're eaten, shows something. Or you only eat them on certain occasions, etc., etc. Excellent. So you're focusing on the rituals and the festivals and the food that inevitably comes along with that, right? We could also have a whole section on there on dance and clothing. If you think back, I don't know when you folks took foreign language, but that might have been your first introduction to multicultural education, right, or multiculturalism. It was for me, and I remember back to middle school, so this would have been late 80s. I remember that when I took Spanish, and some other students could also take Italian, German, or French. Those are the 4 languages offered at my school. We would have a language multicultural day at our school. It was a festival, multicultural festival. And it inevitably led to, we're going to play songs from each of these 4 cultures. We're going to eat foods that you have prepared somehow pre-internet, looked up how to make pizzelles, which are Italian, little basically like fried dough. You're going to eat food from these cultures, and then you're going to sing a song. We might have a traditional dance, and maybe you'll dress up like some stereotype from that culture, right? So you had people dressed up as gondolier drivers. Are they just called gondolera or something? I don't know. And so I should tell you that that's a very innocent, kind of naive view of multiculturalism, and I think we kind of smile looking back at that. That's still perpetuated today. There's a lot of people who think that multiculturalism is just appreciating, and really just using that word pretty lightly, appreciating the differences in food and clothing and music, right? And certainly that's a big part of culture, and that's one of the ways in which culture becomes really obvious, right? But we mean something much more fundamental, much deeper when we talk about culture, right? It's not just the food that you eat or the clothes that you wear. Certainly those are signifiers or signs of what lies beneath, though. So Thank you for those good examples. Okay, flipping through again here. I'm pulling at random. Folk stories we hear. Folk stories, food, style of dress, ways of dealing with stressors. There might be culturally specific ways of dealing with stressors. Music, theater even, and whether or not your culture even has theater. One of the things you might be surprised about hearing, if you didn't already know it, I didn't know it when I first went to a Middle Eastern country. You'll hear a bunch about Morocco this semester. In Arab culture, it is taboo to make depictions of human forms. And so their artwork does not have probably the number one thing that European artwork has, which is pictures of people, right? Portraits of people. And so that's not something that is done. So Arabic art focuses a lot more on geometric patterns and shapes, and they really don't even depict animals either. So it's just part of, so culture shows up big time in art, sometimes really big differences like that. So it's not even just about you can't depict the prophet. In general, you don't depict human beings. And so that's just one of millions of differences that we could single out. So there's some good examples there. What else here? What are some examples of culture? Where do we see culture? Religion, we see it in socioeconomic status. We see cultural differences based on social class, most definitely. And those are some of the big divisions. Notice the word there, divisions or differentiations, even within our own macro culture of America. Okay, another example here. Let's see. Some examples. Japanese culture. Okay, so we could then do like 500 other examples too of just different culture, but based on culture, right? Based on a nation. Japanese culture. Rich people. There's a social class showing up again, or socioeconomic status. Hipsters. Who said this? Where's Leah? Leah. Hipsters. Who are these hipsters? That term is actually used in a derogatory way now, isn't it? Hipsters? Yeah, people start to sneer when they talk about hipsters. At least I've been seeing more and more of that lately. Hipsters, those people are just too cool for the rest of us, right? Would that be you?
No.
Oh, okay. I don't get that vibe from you. Southerners are an example of a cultural group. So in many ways, what you're giving us here is groups of people as examples of what counts as culture. And that's another way, right? Not just rituals or traditions, or styles of art or styles of food, but you're also giving us, groupings of people count as culture. So yes, we mean culture in all these different ways. Isn't this fun? Let's do this now. When was the last time that you were made aware of or experienced culture? Now this is kind of a personal question, and I won't call anyone's names in this, but let me preface why I ask this question and why I get really excited about this question. This is like the philosophical question that we've all heard before, and if you haven't, I think you'll find it really neat if you give it just a few more minutes of thought over the weekend. Ask yourself this. Don't give a first blush answer. Just really think about it. Do fish or are fish? I think this is such a cool idea that I feel like I should point out, I did not make up this question. God, I wish I had, because it's awesome. Ready? Are fish aware of the concept of water? Ooh. Now, here's the thing. If you ask my 7-year-old this, and as of yesterday he was 7, I've now just dated this lecture, very nice, he would say, of course, stupid question, right? Because fish live in water. Their entire world is water. Of course. Why are you asking that? I don't even understand the question anymore. Right? Because it's so obvious. But obviously, I would not ask an obvious question. Right? So it must be the opposite answer. And I think he'd have to be a few years older, based on developmental psychology, for him to realize, if you're asking a question that's that obvious, the answer must be the opposite of what my intuition is. Right? And that's what all of you would have done. Now somebody explain. Somebody explain why fish might actually not have anywhere in their brains, their little tiny brains, a concept for water. Oh, is this just too easy? That is so cool, so awesome. Say it louder. Because they've...
It's all their life in water.
Yeah, yes.
But what if they leave the water?
Oh, okay, hold on. Let's establish what the initial answer is. Because, watch this. Because fish spend their entire life in the water, it's likely that they've never left water. So if you never have left a state or status, how would you be aware of that status? Right? Because you're only usually aware of things when there's differences, when there's something running counter to what you experience every day. What I would also imagine is, a kind of a corollary question here is, you and I don't really have a concept of air. Right? Or don't even believe in air. I mean, somehow it's here and it does what it does, but we don't usually have to think about it. There are certainly people who have differential experience with air and sensitivity and things like that might have a more nuanced understanding of air. For instance, runners, right, or people with emphysema, etc., or asthmatics. I heard a yeah, but people wanted to rebut already and say stuff. Yes, sir.
I mean, wouldn't it have to be aware of the water if it's aware of not having water?
I know. What? Wait, say a little bit more on what you mean.
If the fish is aware of not having water, because obviously when you take a fish out of
No,
water...
the fish is not aware of not having water. You can't be aware of not being aware. Whoa, wait a minute. You keep saying, don't let me interrupt you again. You keep going.
When you take the fish out of the water, it like, does the fish thing that happens to like go...
But you're asking if a current fish in the water?
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
A current fish who has no history of being caught and strangled and eaten by vicious Homo sapiens. Yeah, I don't like seafood. Leave the fish alone. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want people to starve. Don't leave the fish alone. I mean, the vast majority of fish, I would...
So a fish that's never been taken out?
A fish that's never been taken out of the water. Now, here's the thing. You could also say, well, wait a minute. Now I've thought a little bit more. Aren't there fish that jump out of water routinely, and they would have they might have an understanding that, whoa, there's something else up there. Whoa, oh my God, let's get back down. I mean, setting aside those, that's what we mean by the question. And how cool to think that they might not actually know the thing that's so obvious to the rest of us, right? What you got?
Well, I was thinking about when you referenced humans, and you talk about the air. Well, we're fairly aware of our breath, so would you think that, and the fact that we breathe in and out, granted maybe second...
Well, most of the time we're not aware.
Fish with the water going through the gills.
Good question. I don't know. I mean, I think they'd be aware of temperature, because certainly there's different temperature. They might have a concept for light.
Yeah.
But the medium that's transmitting the different temperature and different light and things, they might not actually be aware of it. It's being transmitted through the water, right?
And so I just think as you combine it with as it's going out of the gills, I just didn't know.
Yeah, maybe they have a sense for pressure and what that feels like.
Or just the sensation of it.
Yeah. When I swim faster, I feel more pressure through my gills or something. It's possible.
Running at a higher altitude?
Yeah, so the analog for humans is, yes, of course, when we run or change our heart rate and things like that, then we become acutely aware that we're breathing in. But most of the time, until I just talked about it.
We're also so much more advanced than fish.
Yeah.
That when we're younger, we don't realize it even.
So we do think, and of course we walk, and are we aware of the concept of gravity? Can we even adequately describe it? Probably not, but it's obviously everywhere. So I mean, it's similar kind of questions. I'm now remembering where I got this idea from. I'm pretty sure it's from like an early Gary Larson Far Side cartoon that I don't know if it was a multi-panel cartoon, because I don't think he's known for that, but it was something to the effect of a fish that had been caught and thrown back was trying to explain to, maybe it was like a fish with a hook that was stuck in it, was still back underwater explaining to the other fish, you wouldn't believe it, they like pulled me up. It was like a reference to an alien abduction, right? Where it's like, oh, you're crazy, dude, there's nothing else out there, and there's not beings that are like beaming you up and stuff and giving you medical exams. Like, no, I swear, look at this hook and look what happened. So it would be sort of like, you can use that as another way to answer my question. Are fish aware of water? Well, would they laugh at another fish who tried to tell of tales of another world, right, that wasn't based on water and things like that? Yes?
Wasn't there's a philosopher who has a thing about people in a cave and there's shadows on the wall?
That's Plato.
Guy gets out of the cave and tries to tell everybody where the shadows come from.
Yes. In many ways, that story, that's called the parable of the cave, and it's Plato, and it's the beginning of the concept of do we actually know anything? And I mean, that's the start of academia. I mean, that little kernel of an idea Fascinating, yes. How do we know what's really true and what's really there, right? Great example. So now let's switch this over to the question that we're asking, what is culture? It's sort of like we're asking people who have culture, who are even multicultural, as we said last time, and inhabit many different cultures. We're asking you to define something that you wear so obviously like clothing that is pervasive and everywhere and impacts what we imagine is every single one of your daily behaviors and has been there since you were born and even prenatally affecting you. What is it? And so we're asking you, are you aware enough of culture to be able to adequately describe it and talk about it? And of course I think many of us can say, well, yeah, I know what culture is, but and I think the answer is going to be differential depending on how much experience you've had with different cultures and how many different situations you've been in where you've been forced to kind of reflect back on, well, wait a minute, what's changed now and where was I? And, oh, maybe it's this thing called culture, and I just crossed some kind of boundary that there was no roadmap for or no sign for, but I can feel it, and I'm going to label that as culture. So it's sort of this reflective process, and the long of it is, I think culture is like wearing clothing. That's my metaphor that I use all throughout to help me understand what culture is. Culture is clothing that you wear. Now you can take that clothing off and put on different clothing, hopefully. I guess in this analogy, I don't think you can take your clothing off and be naked if clothing is culture. That's another interesting question to ask, isn't it? We won't explore it much further, but something to think about is, could you be culture free? Right? Don't answer that. More of a rhetorical question, but write it down and think about it. You know, could you ever be, even for 10 minutes of your life, culture free? I don't know. What about when you're on an airplane over international waters?
If you've never lived with anyone else or had any other contact.
Oh, okay. So now we have to get into really strange situations, right? But if you've never, yeah, I mean situations that basically don't exist because part of the human condition and is that we live in groups, that we interact with one another, that we have to like one another at some point. We're interdependent. Okay, so.
You have to learn how to make your cultural influences, not project.
Say that again?
You have to learn how to make your cultural influences, one, be aware of them, all of them, and somehow not project them.
Yeah, you'd have to be keenly aware. So, you're playing with the idea now. You'd have to be You'd have to be keenly aware of what your culture is in all its infinite detail, and then you'd also have to be able to turn it off and kind of step outside of yourself. And I like your idea of you'd have to have some kind of Vulcan rationality. Interesting bias that shows, I think not just for you but for all of us, is that somehow you'd have to turn your emotion center off in order to do that, right? What's that?
Couldn't that potentially just create a new culture then?
Yeah.
A culture of people who are cultureless. I mean,
it's kind of like the whole be an individual. Let's all be individuals, which I think is the most ridiculous idea ever.
Yeah. Let's
all go out and try to be individuals.
When we're inherently social creatures, right? Isn't this fun, by the way? Shouldn't we have a philosophy major here on campus?
Or at least a few
right?
classes.
Or at least a few philosophy classes where it's more fun just to ask the questions and play with them than to talk about the answers. I don't know what exams would look like in that class, right? Oh, you don't need them. You just show up and talk, and as long as you're smiling for at least 50% of the class, you'll get an A. Okay.
As long as you don't get pissed off at someone else's idea.
I think, by the way, the former president of Macon State, Dr. Bell, has a class in this building, actually, I think right now, called the Philosophy of Leadership or something like that. So I think might be a humanities class, or maybe it's a business class, I'm not sure. But okay, so that was a long way, that whole fish question, are fish aware of water, are we aware of culture? Notice that the third question that I asked you on the handout was, when was the last time that you were made aware of or experienced culture? Right? Because what the implication there is that we're not often aware of culture, and we don't often think about it unless we're sort of forced to or confronted in some way. So just to hear a few examples here, I'll run through them a little bit more quickly. I work at a restaurant, and many people from different cultures come in. So I work in a public field that deals with the public. And it's very obvious that people with different customs and languages and appearances and dress and ideas about how the world works exist, and I encounter them on a daily basis. Interesting, during the 2012 London Olympics, thanks for dating this lecture, by the way, Most definitely, right, is culture there. But the other cool thing that you get to experience with the Olympics, and this is where you find out that I'm totally sappy kind of guy. For most of my life, when I watch the Olympics, I'm an Olympics nut. When I watch the Olympics, I cry, especially at the opening ceremony. I say, "Oh, the humanity!" right? And so I think the Olympics is also a time to see human culture, right? And the human values and the things that we aspire to. I'm going to make myself a little bit teary, so I need to stop. Let's move on. But you don't often see the world come together in a peaceful way, right? Notice even in that instance, we still have to somehow compete with each other, right? So, that's a little bit ironic. Peaceful aggression. Non-lethal aggression. Okay, I like it. Let's see. Whoa, July 4th. Oh, I was going to say, that's really specific until you realize, that's a very also specific festival. July 4th cookouts. Interesting. Okay. Oh, yeah, then you're reminded, remember, we're all part of this thing called American culture, remember? And then we stand for hot dogs, relish, blowing things up in a non-lethal way, and flags, right? And I think that's something that even the most hardened people, if you look at people on both extreme ends of the political spectrum, they'll both feel the same thing, right, on July 4th. And that's what's kind of cool. So sometimes there's these big macro level events that just kind of stamp culture all over you for the day, right? And who's the bah humbug person who doesn't celebrate July 4th, right? Bah humbug. That was more of a rhetorical question, but thanks for volunteering. I just called you bah humbug in class. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't think such a person existed. But
yeah, but it doesn't matter who you are. You're practically always invited to it.
You're always invited. You were invited to participate in the national culture that day. Okay. Are there baseball games on that day? Thanksgiving, by the way, another example of national culture that transcends religion, for example, and also social class.
And yes, there
Are there baseball games on July 4th? Cool. Okay, another example here. Lived in Germany and learned to live like they do. Okay, so just actually went to another culture where for a while, which is always weird about international travel, for a while there, you realize, wow, I represent America to everyone that I meet. And boy, wouldn't the rest of my fellow Americans be a little bit, what kind of responsibility that I'm taking on, right? When I first went to Morocco back in 2008, they were fascinated with me. They treated me sort of like a minor, C-list celebrity. And I was like, where am I getting this status from? I don't feel comfortable. And they wanted to know all about American life. And then it turned out that most of what the youth that I interacted with, they were really into hip-hop. And they were really I can rap and beatbox a little bit, but other than that, they realized very quickly I'm not a good representative. I shouldn't have said I could do it, right?
Shouldn't have.
That will be on the test. No, and I'm not going to do it. I'm going to quickly dodge any further questions about that. So, but yeah, it is strange. And how many of you have done international travel of some kind? And that includes even going to Canada, by the way. Okay, so about 2/3 of the class at least. And it is weird, right, to feel like you represent a culture. And that smacks you right in the face. That's when you experience culture. Okay, 2 more. Let's see. A friend from Michigan visited. Okay, so now it's just not about nations, but about regions of the country, right? A friend from Michigan visited this past week. Choice of words and word meanings. Pop versus Coke versus soda. Who wrote this? Oh, I love it. Okay. Let's see here. Yeah, actually, it's funny. I experienced this just the other day at the pool. My kid had bumped into made a temporary friend at the pool, and my friend was drinking what my wife teaches them to say is pop. It was Fanta soda. I call it soda, and my son said to the other one, "Hey, do you like pop?" And the kid was like, "What are you talking?" I mean, the kid was absolutely clueless. He was like 5 years old. He's like, "What are you talking about?" My kid was holding soda. That was the only thing interesting going on. "Do you like pop too? Does your mom let you drink pop?" "Well, what do you mean? What are you talking about? I don't understand." The kid was actually saying that. Bless his little heart. And I didn't know how to intervene. I was like, "Well, orange. What do you guys call Fanta?"
Fanta.
Oh, call it what it is. Okay, all right. I didn't know if you would call it orange Coke or something like that.
Orange soda.
Orange soda? That you would get that?
Most
Okay.
people down here say soda. They don't say Coke. I hear Coke a lot.
Oh, okay. That's what.
That's funny because last week I went across country on a road trip to California, and every single spot that I stopped at, that was the question I asked. I said, "What do you guys call
See,
it?"
now this becomes this is one of the original fascinating questions. I have a graphic that I found on the internet some number of years ago, and I will remember to post it for you. It is a map of the United States that shows in fine detail, somebody did the research on this, to see where the regions of the country, where the delineation is, what people call different things. And if you do not see that up there, by tonight, will someone please email me and remind me, because it's a really cool thing to look at. Again, notice how, when are you aware of culture, or what becomes fascinating about culture, and we focus on these little minor details, right? You're still drinking Coke, but what matters what you call it, right? And we get really, really excited about it for some reason. Okay, nothing wrong with that. One more. I said I'd do two more. Here's one more. At Walmart, in the Hispanic food section, and frozen dinners. Sure, yeah. And the fact that you go to some grocery stores in town and they just say foreign foods, right? Or they say, or ethnic food section. And by the way, notice that the Italian food is not in the ethnic food section, right? And I guess it has its own aisle. It has to, because it's such a big part of our diet. There's at least one Kroger in town that has that section, that aisle, called the Oriental Foods section, which is an old-fashioned term. We don't say Oriental anymore. Oriental, that might actually still work. Oriental can refer to things, but not to people. So you shouldn't refer to people as Oriental. You should call them, Asian, or even more specifically, right? Okay. So, what cultures are you a participant of? So you folks are already thinking about all the different ways in which you're multicultural. And the final question, if you were traveling to a country very different than ours and could bring a small gift, what would you bring? And this is always a fun thing to think about. We'll pass on that for now. But part of the reason for asking that question is to get you guys to be thinking about, wow, what could I hold in my hand that would represent my culture and that I could share with somebody else? And hopefully it would be something that would, I'm assuming everyone would choose something that's authentic, right? And then you have to really get into a really interesting discussion in the year 2012, dating the lecture, of what counts as something authentic, right? Would you give them a CD of Allman Brothers music or Southern music? Would you bring them grits that you made? And keep in mind, many of the things that are most authentic, there's actually international laws and things, and for safety reasons, you can't bring other places. So you can't bring them peaches from Georgia. You can't bring them grits, especially grits that are already prepared. I don't know if they would make it that far, depending on how far it is. I wonder if Canadians know what grits is. That was an interesting question. I just thought of that. No? Well, I can tell you one of the, related to that, I was shocked my first semester teaching here at Macon State. This is 6 years ago. I walked into class. I taught an 8 a.m. intro psych class, and some students had cups, Burger King cups, full of grits in them. And I was like, I was not expecting a spoon to go in that soda cup, and then for something to come out of it, and I had to stop lecture because it was very distracting. I had to know what that was, and I could tell you that that's not something that's on the menu at most Burger Kings. All right. So I'm glad you guys spent some time thinking about that, and I'm sure you might want to hear some other people's answers. If we have time, we'll go back to what little thing would represent our culture. I think the idea of a CD of music is that represents wherever you're from would be really good. But you'd have to be really specific, right? It'd have to be like local or regional music. It couldn't be American music because that's already everywhere, and they probably already have bootlegged copies of it. And that was also very kind of depressing for me to realize was that I can't show them or talk about PlayStation 3 as I can't bring my PlayStation 3 to Morocco and they'd be like, oh, amazing. Right, because they already have it, and they've already got every game that they bought for like 50 cents, right? So they already know about all the music, they can already sing all the songs. One of the most disconcerting things that I ever did while I was in Morocco was I stayed with a host family for a weekend, and we drove around Casablanca with 50 cents in the club blasting, which I could tell you right now. Well, what's that?
I said all the lyrics.
Oh, I'm not so good with lyrics, as you might imagine, but I could tell you that was very jarring. I was like, wow, why can't we just play Moroccan music that would represent what I'm doing, because I want this to be an authentic experience. And of course, there's a difference between what's real and what's imagined, right, as far as what's authentic. So, all right.
You'll find that person in the cave.
You have to go back to the cave, that's right, and to really know what's real, right? So maybe we need to all go back to the cave. All right, so let's continue on. I think this has got us where we need to be as far as thinking. Now it's just a matter, we've got all the questions kind of opened up. Let's just kind of fill in some ideas. All right, so what is culture? As we talked about last time, this will be a very brief review of last time, is that cross-cultural psychology is, some people describe it as a subfield. It's certainly, if that's true, it's an emerging subfield. But more than anything, it's a perspective and a set of methods and a set of questions. And not that many methods and not that many questions. And so it's something that we could get a good handle on in a one-semester course. It isn't necessarily content, because what we do is we overlay this approach and this set of questions on top of the contents of other subfields of psychology. And that's largely how our textbook is set up. We'll do cognitive psychology, we'll do developmental psychology, we'll do emotions, etc. Psychopathology. There's been a tremendous boon in the last 20 or more years, and if you recall from last time, I said some topics have been crying out for cross-cultural analysis for longer than that and have received attention for longer than that. Color perception being one of them, and color names. Emotions is also in a tie for the first thing that people have studied from a cross-cultural perspective. And we'll have a whole chapter on emotions, and is there anything universal about emotions, and what are the basic emotions. You'll recall that from Intro Psych, but we'll have a lot more to say about that. And yes, we also talked about last time that this was a natural step. The emergence of this cross-cultural perspective is a natural step in the progression of psychology as a discipline. As you know or will recall, psychology is 130 plus years old. Probably went through its adolescence fairly quickly over the last couple of decades, and is now coming into its own as a rather mature science. And I think this was maybe late adolescence development, is to start asking these cross-cultural questions. And that's what adolescents do, right, is to say, well, why are these things the rules? And why is this the way it is? And can I break things? And break things in a more meaningful, challenging way than how 3-year-olds break things. So I think we might be about 20 or 21, or maybe 22. We're college age as a discipline now, and I think this is one of the signs of it, is the fact that cross-cultural psychology exists. All right, and we said one of the big picture take-home messages from the entire course is for you to understand in your marrow, down to your marrow, that we are multicultural beings by nature. And so if you've ever been tempted when you hear multicultural or diversity to think, well, that means somebody else, they're referring to other people, keep in mind, we're hoping that this will just be very apparent and obvious, is that you are a part of that moniker, that label, that each of us inhabits many, many, many different cultures. All right. So, some examples of cultures. We just heard some really nice examples, and we only heard a small sampling of them. It's part of the fun of this. How about this? Now, this is a little different than the Coke and Pop idea. Things obviously can be culture, and just to show you, what little things do you bring home in your suitcase when you go to another culture, and what do you choose to bring? What's also practical to bring? What challenges you? And I have a particular bias when I experience another culture. What I'm most interested in is how are our culture, how are my cultural elements translated into this other culture, if they are. What happens when you get these two cultures interspersing? And anyone know the term for that, by the way, when you have elements combined in some new novel form from two or more cultures? It's called syncretic, syncretic. And syncretism is a really, really fascinating idea. One of the things I'm curious about exploring over the next 5 to 10 years is, are there examples of syncretic behaviors In other words, behaviors that people do that are a perfect blend of different cultural behaviors. Now that's kind of a really specific question to ask, but certainly easy to see when you talk about artifacts. And so I'm really interested in any instance of American culture explicitly translated and morphed in some cases when it's brought to other cultures. So here you have a Pepsi Max can, which amazingly isn't crushed by now, but it does have lots of little mini dents. And I guess what I'll do is I'll also pass around if you want to take a peek at it. It's got at least 3 different languages on it. It's got French. No, it's only got 2 languages. Well, it has 3. It's got the logo, Pepsi, which of course is English. It's an English proper name. It's not a word. And Max, which is short for, it's also shortened English words. It does have English on it, but it's also written both in French and Arabic, which are the 2 official languages of Morocco. This costs 3.5 dirham, which is about 40 cents. And it's 250 milliliters. It's quarter, I guess that would be a quarter liter, and I still don't know what that means. I think it's a quarter of a quart, which would be an eighth. Is that a pint? I think this is a pint or a half pint.
That's a half pint.
It's a half pint of soda for 40 cents in a third world country. So it's kind of a luxury item. But here's the other neat thing, is the branding is so important, the name is so important, that they came up with an Arabic logo and Arabic stylized words for it. And you know what that Arabic word is? And I can actually pronounce it because I asked them to. But I also took an Arabic class and just learned the basics of what the alphabet is and how the words are how the letters are combined. This is wow, which the letter wow looks like W, and it makes a b sound. And so this is actually they don't have a p sound in Arabic, so they can't say Pepsi. They say Bebza. So this actually says Bebza Max. Bebza will actually be the Arabic word for max. And I say, well, what does Bebza mean? That's what I asked my host. They said, that doesn't mean anything. That's a nonsense word. But they just wanted to get as close as they could phonetically to sounding like Pepsi, but with an Arabic twist. So it means Bebza Max, or whatever the max part is. How cool is that? It's freaking cool, let me just say. So anyways, you don't have to touch it if you don't want to. Maybe you shouldn't, because actually, you can look at it afterwards. I do have a nasty head cold that I wouldn't wish on any of you. But I've already handed out things. You want to look at it? Feel free. My hands have been thoroughly washed. I'm really good at washing my hands, just to let you know. Here is, doesn't need quite as long. Here's Coca-Cola with stylized Arabic cursive, and it actually says, I said, well, what does that say? And they say, well, that says Coca-Cola, because they have all those specific letters and sounds in Arabic. And anytime you see the single line going up, that's an A, or an alif in Arabic, and so it makes the ah sound. And there's lots of A's in Coca-Cola, and so you see lots of these little alifs, and that makes the C sound, the ka sound. So anyways, this is what Coca-Cola looks like written in Arabic. And also, when's the last time you saw a glass bottle like this, right? So I might tell you at some point today where I got this bottle. Okay. But that was everywhere. They didn't have plastic bottles over there. They had glass bottles. Felt real, like I'm really drinking a real liquid. Okay, so certainly there's millions, billions of things that count as culture or are examples of culture. All right, there's also, and let's get rid of whatever this. It's clearly not smart, right? Because it's covering up the PowerPoint. Make it go away. Does anybody know how to make it go away? Transparent, maybe? That's horrible. You have to admit this is horrible. Oh! I tried that before. Okay. So, the United Nations. This is where college turns you folks, you guys, into a bunch of liberals because we talk about the United Nations. So I just put that aside. I'm not trying to turn you into a liberal. The United Nations is a worldwide organization that governs the world. Okay, it's not inherently some kind of, well, it probably is inherently liberal, only because in order to deal with that many different people and come up with laws that transcend hundreds of different nations and cultural differences, you probably have to have an open mind and be open to ideas that are different. And that is what the basic idea of liberal means. Okay, so the United Nations has been formulating an idea of what counts as culture for a long time, and they have over 900 examples. Hopefully this will just open up for us. We'll have to see. So the idea here is that places can count as culture, locations can. And so you can go see culture, right? You can go experience culture through these physical places. And so here is the specific arm or branch within the United Nations is called UNESCO. And you may have heard of these before. They're called World Heritage Sites. And let's see here. We'll show you what the list looks like in a little bit. But the United Nations has a set of specific criteria and dozens of pages of documentation that's been signed and ratified by its member nations as counting as the criteria that count as a cultural heritage site. Okay, so we won't read all of this, but in case you're curious, this is a pretty detailed answer to the question, what counts as culture? So a site, a physical location, a physical or cultural location somewhere on the planet counts as a cultural site, a World Heritage Site that deserves our protection for future generations, is a place that represents a masterpiece of human creative genius. So there's a bias here towards things created by or used by human beings. That's okay. We can acknowledge that bias if we're humans. So, if fish made cool things, I guess we wouldn't value it necessarily. Although, okay. Strike that even. The Great Barrier Reef is going to be one of these natural places, and that was not man-made. So it doesn't have to have every one of these, but if a place represents a masterpiece of human creative genius, that's gets us thinking that it might be a cultural site. The place exhibits an important interchange of human values. Over a span of time or within a cultural area of the world, something about architecture, technology, some monuments, town planning. So architecture, landscape architecture, physical design. The place bears a unique or at least exceptional testimony to a cultural tradition or to a civilization itself. I mean, this gives me goosebumps thinking about these big picture ideas, right? To be an outstanding example of a traditional human settlement. It might not even be currently in use, and so on and so forth. So these are some very specific ideas about what counts. You can go to the list, which is right here. Notice they call it the list, and they capitalize the L in list, right? Makes you think, the list. I think that's the only way to say that. The list. I'm clicking on the list. Please just take me to a map. It does, and it's an interactive map, and it's amazing if this actually works. Because it probably uses Flash or Java that might not be updated on this. There it is. Now, I paid the $4, and it's amazing. You can order for just like $4 from this website. It takes like 3 months, and it'll arrive, and you'll never know when it's coming. And you can do it through PayPal, I think. They'll send you a beautiful, glossy, 2-page, huge poster-sized map of all of this with the current list and a little bit about each of them. Pretty awesome for like $4. Pretty cheap. I bought that every year that they update it, and then I pay to get it laminated, and sometime I'm going to put it up on my wall in my office. But I can just tell you, I don't know if this disappoints you or not, when you explore this site and take a peek at the, surely, we would understand the United States ones, right? When you take a peek at the at the United States sites that have been identified, most of them, if not all of them, you might not actually know about. They're certainly news to me. And so it's a pretty stringent standard, right? So in other words, before we ever showed you this, if we asked you, give me 10 cultural sites that are monumental and represent American culture, etc., you would come up with things like, well, Statue of Liberty has to be on there. What's that? Mount Rushmore has to be on there. It's monument and it's man-made. What else? Washington, D.C., the entire thing. Philadelphia with the Liberty Bell. What else is there? Maybe the New York City skyline? I don't know. I don't think any of those things make the list. So you're like, well, what makes the list then? What counts? So I'll just give you an idea here. This. Okay. Must be the natural breeding ground of that. Carlsbad Caverns National Park counts as a place that deserves our protection for the next 1,000 years at least. Keep in mind that I think the red ones are threatened ones, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, look, we could do this easier. Let's see here. Let's go down to United States. Let's just see what the list is. Are we there yet?
You can control fine.
A lot of countries in here. No, that would be too easy. Here we go. Great Britain, holy crap, look at that. How many do they have? Is Stonehenge on here? It is, but it's not alphabetical for some reason. So you'd have to do Control F. Okay, United States, here we go. Mesa Verde National Park, Yellowstone, Everglades National Park, Grand Canyon National Parks. They really like our national parks, which are awesome, by the way. Independence Hall. Hey, so we would have been right for one of them. Independence Hall, which I think is in Miami? No, it's in Philadelphia. Okay. Let's see. Kluane, Wrangell, St. Elias, Glacier Bay. Is that in Alaska?
Yes.
Okay. The only thing it must be the Native American Eskimo language, right? Redwood National and State Parks, Mammoth Cave. Is that in Tennessee? Kentucky? Southeast, isn't it? Okay, I'm showing some of my ignorance here. Olympic National Park. What's that? Cahokia Mountain State Historic Site? I don't know. It must be a Native American site. Great Smoky Mountains, that's near us, a national park. Place in Puerto Rico counts. San Juan National Historic Site. Statue of Liberty's on there, yes! The Chaco culture, Yosemite, Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Monticello is on there. A dude's house is on there. That's amazing, right? Now Monticello, that is Jefferson, right? Where's Mount Vernon? So Jefferson wins. The win goes to Jefferson, not George Washington. Well, he gets to be on all the money. Taos Pueblo, is that a town? I don't know. Carlsbad Cavern, didn't we already say that?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, from the map. Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. Don't know where that is. And that, which must be in Hawaii, right? I mean, I don't want to murder it out of respect, so I'll call it that. All right, so what's missing? Well, skylines, right? I think Rushmore's missing. What's that? So, what about the Golden Gate Bridge or the Brooklyn Bridge or what were you saying? Too modern? I don't know. I mean, we'd have to really look. So if you've been to a place, if you've been to another country, it also might be fun to see, well, how many of the World Heritage Sites did I check off here? All right. So that is one very detailed set, perhaps arbitrary set of answers to the question, what is culture? All right, we continue on. So where does culture come from? There's some interesting ideas here put forth in your textbook over the course of a few tables as well, and there's maybe 4 or 5 pages on this. And if you remember my lecture last time, I said that there's a strong emphasis on biology as a starting point, and what I'll add to that here is on naturally occurring things, including geography, right? And so, has anyone ever read Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel? It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning book from about 10, 12 years ago, and it's absolutely a breathtaking book. And it looks at explaining all of human history based on a set of kind of simple factors, including essentially the argument that's laid out here in this book, which is it all starts with, well, there's 3 things that explain why the world looks the way it does today, and it's guns, germs, and steel. And so, and differential timing of when all those things took place in different regions. Well, the same kind of argument here is that based on what's available, where people found themselves, and that we're talking geographical and geological arguments here, based on what's available to them, they have different contingencies placed upon them by the environment, and then that necessitates different behavioral adaptations. And so as a result, a beginning way of looking at culture and where it comes from is it arises out of adaptations to a particular place and time. All right, and so it actually becomes a really neat way to start thinking about, well, why is it that those people do those particular things? And at some level, it could just come back down to these rather, I would say, simple and for sure deterministic kind of ideas about why people do the things they do. And so your book has the beginning. Chapter 1 offers the beginning of some really neat answers here. For instance, if you are from a culture that's closer to the equator, you have a different set of contingencies placed upon you, and that you are more oriented to. I mean, these are sweeping generalizations that your text throws out there, and it becomes really fascinating to mull over. You are more oriented towards shade and avoiding the sun, and not making use of available daylight because there's too much of it. Whereas if you're from northern latitudes, if your culture hails from there, cultures from those regions of the planet, just based on climate alone, solely, nothing else, tend to organize their daily activities and group-level behaviors around maximally using the limited daylight that there is. And so that's two completely different orientations to the world, necessitating different types of adaptations, which will then kind of manifest in little cultural nuances, right? And maybe big cultural nuances. I ask you folks this question here to try out a few examples of your own. Let me just model that for you and give you an example of this, and mostly in the form of a question. Is it any surprise that people in Japan consume massive amounts of seafood and seemingly have their entire food culture based in some way or another on seafood, right? And that their seafood markets rival anything in the world for diversity and complexity and fascination. Is it any wonder? And I guess the answer to that question, although it's rhetorical, would be, well, no, they're surrounded everywhere by water, and it's just a nation of islands, right? And so how about compare that with a culture that developed in Oklahoma, that arose in Oklahoma? Would we be surprised to find out that fish or seafood is not a major part of their culture and may not have even been known to their culture, right? So, I guess it'd still be rivers and things, but they would have a much different emphasis and different things that they do with fish, right? It doesn't just have to be a people or geographic. We're making a geographic argument, so it does have to be that. But how about jazz culture? I mean, we could also come up with define culture as a set of practices. Jazz culture. Where did that develop? Along the Mississippi, right? River. And as part of blues, right? I mean, I don't know everything about each of these examples that I'm giving you, but there's something about the climate, there's something about the resources, there's something about those cultures intermixing and the diversity that's there that gave rise to that particular, what's termed an American, perhaps the only American music form, which is jazz. I think probably hip-hop would qualify as well, although that might be a Jamaican form. That might be Jamaican or West African. Okay, so notice here, we're applying some kind of linear process here, where you start with the natural environment and the resources available and the differential adaptations that people have to make, and applying the same universal people resources and psychological toolkit, as your text talks about, to those different contingencies results in different cultures. Sounds very neat and tidy and deterministic, as if culture is sort of an outcome, or the thing that gets spit out at the end of this conveyor belt. That is a different way of looking at culture as just a product, the end result of a set of processes. Other ways of looking at culture include, well, culture is a process in the making that's very much alive and right now. So it's a process, not a product. And then there's still other ways to look at culture, where culture is the cause of behavioral outcomes. And so keep in mind, culture is a very, very tricky thing to grab a hold of. All right, but as long as we're clear about our biases and which aspect of culture we mean when we're talking, we'll do just fine. So there's 5 or 6 pages in your book that speaks to that slide. So here's a definition. Your text falls all over itself, and it does a better job in this 5th edition than it did in the 4th edition. If I'm not mistaken, the 4th edition of this textbook never actually attempts a definition of culture, if I'm not mistaken. This one, they at least have it in italics and say, with neon all over it, this is our working definition, but it's probably not the real definition, and so don't hold us to it. But it's what we're going to agree to here for the sake of, well, we got to have a definition. All right, so page 7 is where we begin here. I just want to point this out to you. culture in its truest and broadest sense cannot simply be swallowed in a single gulp. Okay, why not? Is this more of a challenge? Can I say a long sentence in one breath? Is that what they're talking about? Not in this book, not in a university course. Oh, this is a throwdown here, right? I'm going to do it in about 20 seconds, in one breath in this class, in one lecture. And you're telling me I can't even do it in an entire course, nor in any training program, which presumably is multiple courses strung together. So, wow. So, although we will attempt to bring you closer to a better understanding of what culture is and how it influences our lives, we must begin by recognizing and admitting the breadth, scope, and enormity of culture. And then leaves us there. It doesn't. That's a tease. That's a tease. And then we go on for another 6 pages. Okay, let's see what page 13 says. Page 13 sums up. Look at this. The whole heading here: a definition of culture. All right. So this is what culture does, and it's a summary of basically the 13 pages that came before. And that's why I read it in its entirety. It's a pretty good summary. All right. Putting the previous section all together, that's a summary statement. That should always be something that jumps out at you as, oh, this is important to pay attention to. Here's a textbook author in the middle of a chapter attempting to summarize everything into something neat and concise. Let me grab onto that. Okay. We know, so we hold these truths to be self-evident, that people have needs that must be met in order to survive. Ooh, obviously, or else there wouldn't be people that existed. Okay, so we're starting with that idea. People have needs, and they need to meet those, or else you don't get to survive and be people and have culture. Okay. They come to the world equipped with a universal psychological toolkit, because we're all human beings and all have the same genetic package, or same genetic template, that gives them the tools to address those needs, but in a variety of ways. I'm adding that part. But they also live in groups, and the groups exist in different ecologies with different levels of resources. Thus, groups of people need to adapt their behaviors to their ecologies in order to maximize the use of their available resources in order to meet their needs. So there's this whole idea of differential everything, differential ecologies, differential resources, differential adaptation to those differential contingencies. And as a result, cultural differences arise out of that. These adaptations produce behaviors, ways of living, ways of thinking, ways of dressing, ways of celebrating, and ways of being, in short, that differentiate the peoples of the world. Ah, that's nice. That's a nice story. Why can't it just end at that? Uh-oh, we got another 15 pages here. Okay, that's pretty good. Then we actually still go another 2 pages before we get the textbook's working definition. Middle of page 15, boldface, a definition. You gotta love it, right? I mean, it's really, you haven't seen a textbook like this ever, right? That has such a hard time defining its own topic, right? I think if you go back to your intro psychology book, it defines psychology in the first page. It doesn't tease you for 15 pages telling you how hard this damn pursuit is, right? Okay, here we go. Whoa, they're going to do it again. But look at this. To be sure, there is no one accepted definition of culture in either psychology or anthropology or sociology. So, yes, we know. You're taking 15 pages to tell us that. Okay. What is important, however, is that we have a working definition of culture for our own use. Yes, please give it to us. In this book, therefore, we define human culture as a unique meaning and information system shared by a group and transmitted across generations. I would put period, because that has the elements of that definition that we need. But then what it's saying is, based on that summary that we just talked about, a functional idea of what culture does, that information system that's been shared and that's unique to those people and has been transmitted across generations, this is what it does. It meets the basic needs of survival, probably even more than the basic needs of survival, pursuit of happiness and well-being, and it helps them to derive meaning, culture-specific meaning from life. Awesome. That's a good definition. That is wholly lacking from the 4th edition of the book. And I looked everywhere in here to see if Cohen 2009, you would think, a 2013 book would cite Cohen 2009, especially right here. And I don't see Cohen 2009. Shame. So, they're probably rivals, right? Probably rival researchers, and you don't want to cite the research of this other guy who's upending the field. What does Cohen tell us? Cohen gives us that exact definition. He gives us a couple pages of all the different ways, the same kind of game. This is what anthropologists have meant over the decades. This is what sociologists have meant. These are the different ways that psychologists throw this term around without thinking. Here's what we agree with. And where is that definition? Okay, page 195. Bottom of first column, top of second column, gives us the three elements of a definition of culture, of a working definition of culture. Right? This is in the Cohen PDF that you have access to. 195. Right? Basically the middle of page 195. Not in your textbook, but in this PDF. Cohen 2009 says, there are many definitions of culture, but almost all researchers see certain... Oh, actually, what he's doing is he's citing Triandis's work. Okay, that's fine. So what Triandis says... Is Triandis cited in here? I don't see Triandis in there. Okay, these are Triandis's words as cited in Cohen 2009. You don't have to write all that part down. There are many definitions of culture, we've established that, but almost all researchers see certain aspects of characteristics of culture. So, in other words, almost all researchers, regardless of your discipline, can agree upon these fundamental elements that have to be in a definition of culture. Ready? They are, first, culture emerges in adaptive interactions between humans and their environment. We've already heard that, right? So that's good. So in other words, culture, the actual stuff of culture, are adaptive interactions between humans and their environment. It's a kind of a transactional thing that arises out of that interaction. So it's there. In short, culture has elements that one of the elements of the definition of culture is that, or said another way, you know something is culture if it includes, what you're referring to or describing includes adaptations. One, that's the first element. Second, culture consists of shared elements. So whatever those adaptations are, they have to be shared, which also means that they have to be agreed upon. So it can't be just your set of adaptations and the things that you think work, but it's something shared by a group of people, two or more people, as a very basic idea. So these are things that are shared. And then third, culture doesn't exist for just the people living at that time. For it to really count as culture, and to count in our definition of culture, those adaptations that are shared and agreed upon have to be transmitted and taught in some way, written down or taught in school, etc., and shared with future generations. So there's this way that culture gets propagated and reproduced, right? And of course, along the way, it can get little mutations and it can get modified to fit the new times. How awesome is that? So we've got basically adaptive behaviors, if you define behavior very broadly. Culture is adaptive behaviors that are have shared meaning among a group of people and get transmitted in some form from generation to generation. Three elements: adaption, shared meaning, and transmitted. Awesome. And that's a very broad definition, but it's also what Cohen is arguing, and other researchers that he's relying upon. It's what he's saying is, this is what most researchers in this field, regardless of whether you're in a humanities department or an anthropologist or a historian or an economist or a psychologist, we can at least agree that culture has these things. And so that's our working definition. Surprisingly or not, it's the exact working definition that's in your textbook. So that's pretty good too. All right, let's see what else we have before we let you go. Another way to get at what something is to say what it isn't. And this is a tricky argument to make, and refer to you. I'll plead with you to read through the text. There's a paragraph on each of these ideas, but oftentimes, remember we said culture is one of those words that gets thrown around very, very loosely without much thought. We said that last time. One of the ways that happens is people in the same sentence will say society and culture interchangeably. And we're going to plead with you to be more specific and to not do that. And are they roughly the same thing? Yes, but they're also dramatically different. And that sounds weird to say. But essentially the idea here is society is a structure. It's a set of interrelationships among people and groups of people, and systems for how those different groups can relate to one another, and practices. You can see how that could seem like culture, but it's something a lot more static, something a lot more, in many ways, tangible than culture, even though you don't actually see society either. So that's part of it, is we're having trouble. We always have trouble in the social sciences because we're talking about things that you can't hold, right? Culture is one of those, society is one of those, although we're keenly aware of the presence of these things. Nationality is just simply what country you're from. So that is not everything, and that is probably the gravest sin when you talk about culture. We've committed it a little bit today, but we've done it in a knowing way, right? If you want to talk, what are some examples of culture? Japanese culture, Jamaican culture, American culture, Moroccan culture. All right, yes. There are national cultures, and we'll say a lot more about this throughout the class, especially when we talk about national character. But culture is more than that, and also keeping in mind our general idea that we're multicultural beings, and how silly is it to look at 300 million people living in America and to think that we all share the exact same culture, right? And so that's not true. And finally, you might also think of ethnicity as interchangeable with the concept of culture. And that also gets at another aspect or flavor of what we mean by culture, and it does have the historical time element involved. Ethnicity refers to what people are you from, do you hail from, and we're sort of talking about your descendants here, right? And so an example of ethnicity would be, I am of German heritage, or more broadly, I am European American, that's my ethnicity, or I am African American, or I am Asian American, right? Or my family goes way back to Ireland or to Greece, right? I mean, that's ethnicity, and it means a bunch of things, but it doesn't capture everything that we mean as broadly when we say culture. And again, in conclusion, what we mean when we say culture, more than that. Sort of that, but also more than that. We're talking about the entirety of the adaptations that arise out of the interactions between humans and their environment. Wow. That those are shared adaptations and meanings, and that those get transmitted in some way from generation to generation. And that's more than ethnicity, it's more than society, and it's more than nationality. All right? So we'll stop there for today. I will give you guys one fun little homework assignment over the weekend. Believe me, it's fun. And again, not graded, and there's not necessarily right or wrong answers. Let me just tell you briefly what it is. It's asking you to come up with the answers for that you'll have by the end of this class before we start to talk about the questions and the answers. In other words, it's a way of getting at what your initial knowledge is, and then it'll be fun in December to look at this again and to see if you were right or wrong, right? So that's what we'll do. I'll hand that out, and have a fantastic weekend.